Husband's secret underground lair uncovered, filled with love letters from his ex, and I'm not dressing that up as a metaphor or a poet's tantrum. I mean an actual room under my actual house with a door disguised as a shelving unit and a ladder that smelled like hot metal. And I'm Mia, I'm 32. I'm a municipal archivist who alphabetizes other people's secrets for a living and thought I understood the difference between preservation and hoarding until I found out my husband had been preserving a version of himself I'd never met and hoarding an entire paper heart that didn't have my name anywhere on it. If we're doing true confessions, I've spent years telling the public that history is a conversation with the dead while practicing a marriage that was a monologue with a living man, and it turns out monologues echo, sometimes they reveal trapdoors. The day it began didn't announce itself with cinematic thunder. It was a Thursday with the texture of cardboard. At lunch I ate the last third of a tuna sandwich at my desk because I'd been scanning a stack of 1930s council minutes that smelled like attic and mothball pretension, and my coworker Sadie was trying to convince me that life is a series of small, gentle rebellions like taking the long way home or buying strawberries out of season. I didn't take the long way home. I went straight there because Evan, the husband, had texted running late love you with a tiny blue heart he always used like punctuation, and I believed people when they told me things, especially if I was already tired. We live in a 1920s bungalow that creaks like a polite ship. 2 bedrooms, a narrow hallway that my socks have memoized, a laundry with a bad attitude. The previous owner left us a wall of built-in shelves in the little room we'd been calling the study, even though Evan mostly used it for guitars and once, disastrously, kombucha. I found a note taped to the kettle, his that kind of man, domestic with a flourish, that said boil me with a smiley, which was cute enough to make me forgive the fact that the trash hadn't taken itself out. I made tea with my municipal solemnity, set the mug down, and heard, I swear, a noise that didn't belong to our house. Like a mechanic's sigh. Not the fridge, not the neighbor's lawnmower, softer, expectant. I put my ear to the study wall because I am ridiculous and also because sound is a map if you let it be. I heard a faint click. I pushed the leftmost shelf and it didn't move. I pushed the third, the one with the coffee table books we never open and the jar that says Amsterdam coins, though we spent them years ago. It gave just an inch, indignant. I slid my fingers along the seam where wood meets wall and felt the uncouth logic of hinges. There are moments when you can feel your life tilt toward a choice the way a stack of papers tilts toward a breeze. I had a choice. I made the wrong one or the right one depending on whose movie this is. I pulled. The entire unit swung out like a theater set. Behind it, a rectangle of black. Not the blackout of bad wiring, but a purposeful dark, the kind that has practiced. The smell was the first treason, colder, cleaner, a hint of solder, a note of paper long stored. I said, nope, very quietly, like you say to a spider to make it feel seen. I also reached for the light switch because curiosity is my most reliable sin. The switch was clever, housed in the trim. A soft click, a string of lead strips obeyed, and stairs revealed themselves with the smugness of secrets that think they're art. I told myself to call someone. I didn't. It's not that I'm stupid, it's that I'm an archivist and the sight of stairs to a catalogued unknown is the closest thing I have to religion. I put my hand on the rail and it was warm. I went down. At the bottom, 10 steps, 11, a room. Not a bunker, not a panic room, not a tornado apology. A room that had not been improvised. A poured slab floor sealed with something expensive, walls painted a serious gray, a workbench along one side with tools hung in choreography, a rug I recognized from a store we'd said we weren't fancy enough to shop in. Lamps with low, obedient light. A couch. A desk with a chair that had lumbar support my spine resented not knowing about. And on the far wall, open shelves that took my breath the way a cold wave does, rows and rows of black archival boxes, the kind we use at work, labeled with months and years in Evan Square Engineer's handwriting, starting 8 years ago and continuing through last week. You know those moments where your eyes give your brain an assignment it would prefer to skip. I walked to the shelves because of course I did. I put my hand on the nearest box, August, November 2018. My own hands, in disloyalty or bravery, jury's out, took the lid off. Inside, bundles of letters tied with cotton tape like linen napkins at an old restaurant, each bundle labeled A to E or E to A. The paper had that heavy thickness that tells you the writer takes herself seriously. I untied one, careful because I don't know how to be any other way with paper. The first letter began, "Evan, do you think it's possible to keep loving someone you promised to stop writing to?" And I put it down so fast I almost flung it because letters are supposed to be a technology for intimacy, not a trapdoor. Her name was A. I learned that quickly because she liked to sign just the letter, looping it like she was calling a genie and daring it to disappoint her. Anya eventually, there it was on an envelope from years before when they were still giving themselves their whole names because that's what you do before you rewrite the rules. X. The word is small for what she was apparently to him. As I stood there with my stomach circling a drain, I understood that this room was a church for a religion I hadn't converted to, and he had been attending daily. I read. I don't know how long. The letters weren't pornography, not the kind you could take to a courtroom and say, "Here, Your Honor, is my ruin," but they were the other kind, the "remember the bend of that road just past the library" kind, the "your mouth looks like a question mark when you're thinking" kind, the "you should learn to poach an egg properly" kind. The care in them made me feel sick. I'm not naive. I know people keep old feelings like coins in a jar, taken out to clink against their teeth when the light is bad. But this wasn't coins. This was a currency they'd invented together and spent behind my back like they never wanted to be poor again. I found the note that explained the architecture of the whole thing 12 boxes in. "Rules," it said at the top in Evan's hand. He'd turned our marriage into a protocol while I slept upstairs like weather. 1. No email. 2. No phones. 3. Handoffs only via P.O. box or third party. 4. Archives mandatory. The fourth rule made me sit down hard on the rug with the blade of a laugh in my throat. Archives mandatory. Of course he decided significance by whether he could store it. I thought about running upstairs and throwing his grandmother's vase against the wall because I have a flair for theater when no one's watching. Instead I did a smaller, crueler thing. I kept reading. I read A to E March 2020, when the world was learning to be inside and they were rediscovering the early language of each other like smug survivors. I read E to A June 2021, where Evan described our road trip to the lake without ever naming me, a woman driving beside him who apparently operated the car and the conversation like a well-maintained appliance. I read A to E January 2023, in which she told him she'd tried to stop writing and failed, that the failure soothed her more than any success ever had, that at 40 you get to name your vices as if they were fevers and let them burn you clean. 40. She was older than me by 8 years, a fact my meanest self tried to absorb like a compliment and failed. My meanest self was no match for my precise self, who kept logging dates like evidence. At some point the room experienced a weather event. I started sweating like an old house in summer. I put the letters down carefully as if the etiquette of handling could save me from their content, and I stood and walked to the workbench because when your heart is a siren, touching a hammer helps. The bench had a line of notebooks too, black, elastic, moleskins like the ones Evan has always bought by the half dozen. Notes. Fragments. A list titled "Things I Can Tell Mia Without Lying," which turned my spine to glass. The items were stupid: wrenching sound from dryer, saw a hawk, missed my exit, can't sleep, made you a playlist. I closed the notebook so I wouldn't bleed on it. I can make anything less dramatic by making a list. I found a pad of graph paper on the desk and wrote: 1. Go upstairs. 2. Take photos. 3. Do not touch more than you already have. 4. Breathe. 5. Decide if you want to burn the house down. 6. Do not burn the house down. 7. Call Sadie. 8. Drink water. 9. Plan confrontation somewhere with chairs that cannot be thrown. My handwriting looked like a witness. I took photos. Evidence not because I planned to litigate but because the mind is a sieve when hurt, and I knew later I'd need the shape of the shelves to prove to myself this wasn't a dream with expensive lighting. I turned off the LED strips. I climbed the stairs like the wrong person in a fairy tale. The shelf swung back with the gentle confidence of money spent quietly. The house received me without comment. I thought I had time to rehearse what I'd say. Evan came home early. The front door put his key in with its usual little gasp, and there he was with hair that always looks like a bird just left it, saying "Hey honey" with the loose intimacy of someone who doesn't know they're at an audition. I stood in the hallway and watched him put the mail on the console and touch the bowl where we keep our kindnesses, the odd little notes, the cat toy, a button that fell off a cardigan and never rejoined society. He looked up and smiled, and I loved him in the ugliest, most robust way I knew how, which is to say my chest hurt and my jaw went numb. "What's up?" he asked, and I thought that's the last time that question gets to be small. "Can we go into the study?" I said, as if we were about to look at emails. He cocked his head, somewhere a dog wagged because that tone lives in the human throat, and said sure, and we walked there and I touched the shelf and his body responded the way a building responds when an earthquake's first note sings under it, everything braced. "Don't," he said, and my heart sat down like it had to catch its breath. "Please don't." Of all the lines I could have delivered, the one that showed up didn't belong to the courtroom drama in my head. I said, "How long have you not wanted me to know you?" He closed his eyes because the truth is a light bright enough to make people who aren't ready try to nap. "Mia," he said, and that's when I cried, not because of the letters, not because of the room, but because his voice had that careful curve to it he uses when he explains tracking focus to his photography students, and I realized he was about to explain me to me. He did, in his way. He said it started as a project, not the letters, the room. He'd wanted a space to think, to be, to make. He'd built it while I was at my mother's last summer because the contractors could come during the day without my noticing, and he knew I'd notice because I am the kind of person who can tell if a book has been moved by an inch. He told me about the delight of the first switch on, the click and hum, the way the air changed shape around him when the lead strips gave him a horizon he'd invented. He told me about going down there at night the way some men pray. He told me about Anya like she was a bridge he had kept up after the war. They dated in their early 20s with a stupidity he described like legend. They ended when she took a job in another city and he met me and decided to be the kind of man who doesn't keep old flames in the cupboard the way children keep matches. They didn't talk for years. Then she sent him a postcard to the studio addressed to Evan, ex of mine, survivor of our fireworks, and he laughed and put it on a shelf and didn't reply for 6 months. Then he wrote back a sentence, "Do you still walk too fast for the sidewalks?" and she wrote a paragraph. He wrote a page. She wrote a letter. They set rules that would keep them honest and broke them like polite people break chocolates, carefully with a napkin. When he tried to explain why paper, his voice softened into a softness I haven't heard since the first year we learned each other's shapes. "Letters slow you down," he said, not looking at me. "They make you carry the weight of your words." "You mean they make your betrayal artisanal," I said, and I didn't raise my voice because this was a museum and I was not going to be the loudest exhibit. He cried. I did too. We are verse and refrain when it comes to tears. He said he loves me and that he also loves the version of himself he becomes when he writes to her, which is a sentence sculpted by the kind of selfishness that wins awards at festivals I don't attend. He tried to tell me I had the best of him, I had the daily him, and I wanted to ask if he knew how insulting it is to be told you've been given the leftovers of someone's imagination. He said the room was about integrity and a place to store things, and I said, "Oh, sweet man, you built a confessional without a priest." He said he'd end it right then, he'd burn the boxes, and the part of me that knows the smell of old paper like other people know their mother's voice screamed no so loudly I had to wrap my arms around my own ribs. "You don't get to burn history because it indicts you," I said. "Also, have you met me? I will not allow a ritual fire unsupervised." We didn't sleep. He lay on the couch like a man hoping upholstery can absolve him. I lay in our bed like a person auditioning for the role of someone who can breathe through a mattress. In the morning my face looked like water had excavated it. I made coffee for both of us because my body knows how to be courteous even when my heart wants to starve. We named logistics, accounts, counseling, work leave, the cat. He suggested therapy, couples, like a man presenting an invoice he thinks will hush a mob. I said yes because I am not a mob. I am a woman who likes to understand how a bridge failed before naming it unsalvageable. You think the story is the confrontation. It isn't. The story is the month after where the air in the house changed weight. It was the way my feet avoided the study like a squeamish tourist avoids a crime scene. It was how I bought a lockbox for my own notebooks as if my pen had taken up arms. It was Sadie bringing over lasagna and not commenting on the fact that I was wearing the sweater Evan hates because it pills like a sheep with a death wish. It was me going to work and putting my hands on documents that had outlived their writers and whispering, "Teach me how," like a creep. It was our therapist, a woman with the confidence of a well-built chair, asking us to describe each other without saying what the other one does for us, and Evan saying she notices everything like it was an accusation and a gratitude at once, and me saying he's gentle with broken things, and then realizing that included me. We set rules, not about letters, those were done. He wrote an ending that I read over his shoulder and it tasted like chalk and rain, but about rooms. We agreed the lair, as I'd taken to calling it in my head because calling it study too gave it a dignity it hadn't earned, would be shut. Not sealed with concrete or ritual flames, just shut. For now. I asked for one thing he couldn't argue with, a full inventory. If my marriage was going to be an archive, I was at least going to do the finding aid. He balked. I waited. He said okay. We spent a Saturday like librarians in a disaster movie. We wore cotton gloves because I insisted. We opened boxes. When he cried at a phrase, I didn't comfort him. When I laughed at a line so pretentious it could have been framed, he didn't scold me. We logged sender, recipient, date, themes. He started to flag some with sticky notes that said "for Mia," and I plucked them off and stuck them on his forehead until he smiled because humor is an instrument I will play even when the band has left. The letters didn't get less painful. They did get less magical. Paper is only magic if you give it your blood. We created a separate box for things that belonged to me accidentally. Postcards they'd joked about that were from trips Evan and I had taken, ticket stubs he'd slipped in as bookmarks without thinking, a grocery list in my hand on a scrap they'd used for envelope padding. It was like finding my handwriting inside a stranger's diary, proof I had been in the room all along like air. We argued like smart people with too many feelings. Sometimes we did it well. Sometimes we did it like children practicing adult lines. Once in therapy I said he chose paper because it forgives, it doesn't ping back, it doesn't keep receipts that talk, and Evan said, "You love paper," and I said, "I love paper that knows it's not a body." Our therapist said, "Good," in that dry way decent therapists do when you walk yourself to a door and jiggle the handle only lightly. I told Anya in my head to go haunt someone else. I also, secretly, wrote her one letter I never sent. I wrote it on thick paper I bought from a store where the owner says "You deserve this," like an incantation. I wrote, "Dear A, I have read the weather you wrote into my house. If I were unkind, I'd say you performed a duet on a stage you didn't build. If I were generous, I'd say you kept a human alive during a season he forgot his own temperature. If I were tired, which I am, I'd say here is your chorus back." I folded it and put it in the freezer because that seemed funny and also because my grandmother used to freeze letters from men she suspected of charming their way past her resolve. I am a woman who believes in rituals even when they are invented as jokes. I wish I could tell you that I forgave him with a flourish and we're writing our own letters now to each other from across a narrow room where the light cooperates. The truth is smaller and harder. I am learning to ask for specificity. He is learning to tell the truth before it becomes archaeology. The room still exists. Some nights, when I can't sleep, I imagine knocking on the shelves and asking the door if it will open for me alone. Some days, when I can't stand being the person who notices everything, I leave the house and sit in the library at work among the old city maps and pretend all the secrets are topographical, legible, and well-labeled. 3 months after the discovery, we took the letters to the archive where I work, because sometimes the only way to keep something from ruling you is to give it to a bureaucracy. I checked with the director, explained it as a personal collection that needed neutral custody while we figured out ownership and access. She looked at me the way a woman looks at another woman when she recognizes the shape of the whole. She said, "We have a freezer," and I didn't cry until I got home. We signed paperwork. We boxed, labeled, barcoded. The lair's shelves looked naked. Evan sat on the bottom step and said, "I feel both lighter and less interesting," and I said, "Welcome to adulthood," and then immediately softened it with a hand on his shoulder because I'm not a monster. I'm a woman trying to rebuild a staircase while people are still using it. Sometimes I ask myself if I would have preferred to never know. I imagine the shelf staying flush against the wall forever, the soft click never quite reaching my ear, me making tea until I die, him writing letters to a ghost who claps on paper. There is a tenderness in that fantasy that terrifies me. It's the tenderness of museums that never let you open a drawer. I'm glad I opened the drawer. I hate what I found. Both can live in me without trying to kill each other. Last week I found a new noise. The cat discovered the hidden hinge and thinks we've opened a playhouse, and I laugh like a person who had been holding her breath for a season and suddenly remembered oxygen. I told Evan and he laughed too, and the laughter didn't solve anything, but it also didn't break anything, and it felt like a small treaty signed by a country that had been at war with its own maps. If you're looking for the moral, I don't have a neat one besides this. Some rooms are not metaphors, but they behave like them. Some men build lairs because they cannot bear to be ordinary in the bright, ordinary rooms where love does its unphotogenic work. Some women open doors because they are allergic to being the last to know whose air they're breathing. I used to think archives were about worship. Now I think they're about humility, about admitting that what gets kept is not always what deserved keeping. I am keeping this, the image of my own hand on that shelf, the precise moment I learned I could be both archivist and arsonist and choose daily not to burn. Today I made tea and didn't listen for a secret cooling itself. I alphabetized a drawer at work that no one will ever consult and felt at peace about it. I told Sadie that strawberry season is a form of forgiveness, and we bought a punnet and ate them walking home like teenagers who haven't yet learned to save sweetness for later. At home I stood in the hallway, touched the wood where the seam is, and said out loud, "You live with me." The shelf didn't answer because shelves rarely do. I went to the kitchen. I took the letter from the freezer and put it in the recycling, because I don't need to send a ghost a map anymore. The kettle sang, the cat yawned, the morning made its neutral face, and I thought without any flourish that I am a person who can open a door and also close it, and that feels like a history I finally get to write on purpose.